Good afternoon. As always, I'll start with a brief overview of our last performance, and obviously not the type of performance we desire. We came in, we looked at it yesterday with our football team and made some acknowledgments. There were several things that were very disappointing about the game. I think chief among them was the fact that Houston, we thought, were more physical than us and played harder than us. And that's something that's got to change immediately. I felt that in stadium. I expressed that after the game. And so we got to look at what we're doing in an effort to make sure that that doesn't reoccur. And specifically, in terms of the structure of preparation, it makes us look at our practice attire. The last couple of weeks, due to a variety of circumstances, short weeks via Monday Night Football, short weeks because of travel adjustments, et cetera, we've been in helmets in preparation, and I think the start of that game, us warming up to the physicality component of it, probably had something to do, particularly at the early stages of the season in terms of development and fundamental development, practicing in helmets. I thought they had better pad level, particularly early in the football game on both sides, and I just thought that that was a catalyst in terms of how this game got started. We chose to defer in an effort to start fast. They had a 15-play drive, and so that wasn't what we were looking for. Within that drive, we had them in second and long several times. I didn't think we played really good in second and long circumstances. But again, I think a lot of it has to do just generally with physicality, and we warmed up to the physicality component of play, and you can't do it. If you do it, you spot people 13, 16 points. You're running on the beach at that juncture, and that's what the game felt like for us. Obviously, in the second half, we were able to gain some traction in that regard and win the line of scrimmage more consistently on both sides. That could be reflected in the establishment of the run game and some quick 3-and-out like possessions on defense. But our inability to finish those drives in the form of touchdowns kept the margin where it was, and as the game wore on, it ended up being the result that it was. And so, that's kind of an assessment of it, if you will. The physicality component of it is something that has our attention, particularly as we prepare to get ready for the Baltimore Ravens game. Those of us that have been in this game, we understand what that's about. But largely, obviously, there's a lot of things that we got to do better in all three phases so that results of games don't look like that. But the physicality component is something worth mentioning because we cannot compromise that. We're still very much a group in development in terms of division of labor and rhythm and things that we do extremely well. And so we're still working and developing in those areas. Probably took a step back in some of those areas, but that's less significant, really, to be quite honest with you, than the physicality component. We probably took a step back because of the lack of physicality. If you look at the run game specifically, there wasn't a breakout run from a defensive perspective that maybe there was in Cleveland or San Fran, but they had a successful run game nonetheless because the power fell forward. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the impact of a day in pads, what it could provide us, and we better take full advantage of it in preparation this week. We had the pad level down, we had to come off blocks, we can't trade 1-for-1. That's how you stop the power from falling the wrong direction. You play with really good pad level, you come off blocks, and those things could be born out of muscle memory through team preparation, particularly at the early stages in the year. And we did that knowingly, uncomfortable about wearing helmets in the early portions of the year, but you balance that decision making with availability in short weeks, and that's just the balance of decision making that comes with working to prepare a group. It's not exclusive to us, it's what everybody does. And so we're excited about a normal week, if you will, from a prep standpoint. We better utilize it. We better carry our pads tomorrow, and we better make good use of that, particularly because of who we're playing. From a health standpoint, I want to update you guys with Kenny. He's got what could be described as a bone bruise. He's scheduled to participate in some level of participation tomorrow and then proceed from there. Obviously, his functionality and comfort being the guide tomorrow. The more functional and more comfortable he is, the more work he'll get. And then as we push forward toward the game, the quality of his work will be a determining factor on his availability. Our quarterback is no different than any other position, man. Young players, they need the in-helmet perspective on preparation. He knows and understands that. He's prepared to practice tomorrow. Again, we'll let tomorrow be our guide in terms of how we move forward with that understanding. Dan Moore has a knee sprain. He'll be out this week. Freiermuth has got a hamstring. He'll be very doubtful this week. DeMarvin Leal is in the concussion protocol. We'll let the protocol be our guide. Presley, again, is dealing with the hamstring. We'll take a look at him at the latter part of the week and make a determination moving forward from there. James Daniels, just saw him in the training room. He's looking much better with this groin injury. He'll probably participate at some level, and we'll let the amount of that participation and the quality of that participation be our guide in terms of his game day availability. Now let's talk about Baltimore. We know them, they know us. The waters run deep, we understand that. But let's talk specifically about how they're functioning right now and the things that have our attention, starting first with their offense. Obviously, they got a new coordinator, but the thing that really jumps off at you remains the same, and you better be willing to do what's required to minimize Lamar and his impact on the game, and it shows up all over. Obviously, they're spreading the field out, and he's reading full fields in the passing game, spreading the ball around. Obviously, Mark Andrews he's got a long-term relationship with, and the production speaks for itself. A couple touchdowns last week. Been warming up to it. I think Mark was slowed during team development and maybe missed week 1. The more recent games, you see him gaining this traction and the relationship between those two. Zay Flowers, can't say enough about him. Dynamic player. Not surprised that he's having the type of success that he's having. I personally have seen a lot of him. His tangible talents are one thing, and those are obvious. He's got really good speed, short area burst, change of direction, and body control and those things. But I quickly understood about him, and from watching him at BC, that the interesting component of his calling card is the fearlessness in his play. He is fearless. He runs into dark places at full speed. He's combative in his play. That's probably the platform that provides him an opportunity to make the type of plays that he makes. He will not be intimidated. He is combative and competitive in all circumstances. Quite honestly, I've never seen him flinch. And I've watched a lot of football of that young man, obviously, because he played at BC. In the run game, it's still very much Lamar-centric. He is their leading rusher. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns. They got a new coordinator, but their willingness to run him, particularly from a design run standpoint, red zone, if you will, situational ball is still very evident. His ability to extend plays and create with his legs, whether he chooses to throw it as passing plays get extended, or he chooses to run downhill at you. A lot of what goes on is about Lamar Jackson, and we better focus our energies there. He's very difficult to duplicate in preparation because obviously you don't have a lot of quarterbacks on your roster with arm talent and movement abilities like that. But we'll do what we've always done. If it means, putting a wide out back there from time to time in certain situations to reflect his run talents and a quarterback to reflect his pass talents, we better be thoughtful and intentional about how we're preparing to stop him. And given our recent circumstances in terms of our inability to minimize the run and lessen its impact on the game, we better be ready to deal with their run game in totality. They got a committee of backs, but it does not speak to a lack of commitment in the run game. Justice Hill, Gus, Melvin Gordon, doesn't matter, man. They can throw a lot of people at you. You better be really solid in terms of being gap sound in the run game. They make that stressful by the design quarterback component of their run game in terms of play fakes. You got to be good on the perimeter. They fake jets, they hand jets, they fake keeps, Lamar keeps, and so sometimes that minimizes your ability to get as many hats as you would like to the run game, but they do so thoughtfully and intentionally, and so they create space in those circumstances, and particularly when you talk about a quarterback like Lamar, his running abilities and their schematic approach to his running abilities, it creates space in a lot of areas. If we're going to have a successful day, we got to be good in space. We got to be good in space in one-on-one circumstances and coverage. We got to be good in space as tacklers because we got quarterback mobility and those schematics. That's exactly what it creates. Coupled with the jet sweep game and the QB read component of it, it thins out defenses. It minimizes your ability to pursue to the ball in large numbers, and thus it puts a premium on space play one-on-one wise and on space tackling one-on-one wise. So we got to have a good week in that regard. On the offensive side of the ball, the myriad of pressure packages that they present is a concern. If you look at the Indy game, particularly because Indy has some quarterback kind of instability or whatever in preparation, you see their willingness to get after the quarterback in some of their pressure packages. Obviously, we've seen a lot of it over the years, but that doesn't provide comfort, man. We better have an edge about us in terms of identification and being really solid there, but that's just a component of it because they do a really good job of being multiple in their pressure postures. You can get traditional four-man rush, you can get bogus four-man rush, you can get five-man rush that allows a safety to be in the middle of the field. You can get zeros where they all-out pressure you, and they do a good job of mixing all of the above. And so the intellectual component of it is just a part of it. We better be really good once we've handled the intellectual component of it at physically winning the matchup component of it. And if you're trying to do that, you start with talking about these linebackers. Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, man, is a dynamic duo. They are. They're all situational guys. Man, you could put 5 wideouts on the field. I would imagine that those 2 guys are still going to be on the field, and I think that just speaks to how significant they are. In run circumstances and pass circumstances, whether it's in coverage or as blitzers, man, they are impactful. We got to work our tails off to get hats on those guys at all times, understanding that they're still going to make a play or two. They're going to make their plays. They defeat blocks and get where they're going. Those guys are the catalysts for that unit. And so we got to be really good there. Really respect Kyle Hamilton's development. Saw his versatility a year ago. They got short at corner. He played nickel and played it very well. Good around the line of scrimmage in terms of his blitzing and run tackling and his ability to cover receivers as a slot corner. Obviously, he's a safety by trade, and he moved to safety at the start of this season, but they've had some injuries and so forth, and he's played safety and nickel, and you see his talents in both places. He's good in the middle of the field. He's good as a blitzer. He's good in coverage, and evidently, obviously, he's smart because of all the things that he does for them. They play a lot of people up front. They do. The acquisition of Van Noy is an example of it. They're never going to run out of bodies. You better be ready to deal with a lot of folks in a myriad of fronts and things, schematic things that they do in an effort to create confusion. We turned an A-gap player free about the 5th play of the game, the first time we saw him last year. Came through, he got a hit on Kenny and eventually got Kenny out of the game because of that play. And so there's a history there, but we don't need a history to have our attention. We're familiar with Baltimore and their willingness to apply pressure in a myriad of ways in which they do it. McDonald was relatively new to them from a coordinator perspective, but he's of that tree. He worked with those guys in Baltimore before, Wink, Rex, historically. There's certain things schematically that's Baltimore, and just regardless of, present day things and players and coaches. Baltimore is going to value second level linebacker play. I spoke of this tandem, but really it's probably the third generation of high quality second level linebacker play. Years ago it was Ray Lewis and company, and then it was C.J. Mosley and company, and there's Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen and company. And so there's some things that are Baltimore, just like there's some things that are Pittsburgh, and I think that's one of the things that makes this rivalry what it is, and why the games always unfold in the manner in which they unfold, usually in terms of them being tough and competitive and close and entertaining. And so with all those things being said, man, we're working with an edge as we prepare today. I'll pause and open it up for questions.
Mike, how will you handle the practice with your quarterbacks? Will Kenny get all of it, or will you get Mitch ready just in case?
We'll have a brief meeting tomorrow in the morning at some point before we get on the field to kind of just see where our baseline is and kind of proceed from there. But I'll ask him not to be selfish. I want to get an exposure to where he is without robbing the other guys potentially of preparation. And then as we get into it, his functionality, the quality of his play, how he feels will be a determining factor, not only tomorrow, but how we proceed throughout the week, the remainder of the week.
Mike, you mentioned after the game changes are coming. What are those changes?
You know, I was talking about the physicality component or the lack thereof, and it didn't take long for me to realize practice attire early in the year, but also, you know, some matchup related things, man. We're open to dividing the labor up more finely in an effort to get better play, to put people in circumstances that are advantageous to their skill set without being too specific and getting into game plan related things. We're open to doing whatever is required to highlight the skill sets of people based on what we have seen to this point in the journey.
Mike, when you evaluate the tape from the game and you look at the coaching job, just how do you especially evaluate the coaching job that was done on the offensive side of the ball?
Man, not good enough. Not good enough. Whenever we don't play well, forget win or lose, whenever we don't play well, as a coach, man, you start there. And so that's where we always start. And particularly at the early portions of the season, forget whether or not you're playing poorly or you're losing. There's a get better component of this process, particularly at the early stages of the year, that has a lot to do with coach decision making, how you structure preparation, how you allocate time in preparation in terms of the things that you highlight about what other people do and the amount of physical reps that you tee up for things that you prepare to do. All of that is coaching and elements of coaching decision making and strategy. And so I'm always looking at that, but obviously based on the result of that last game, certainly.
When you talk about it, when you talk about a division of labor, especially with players, does any of that extend to coaches, whether that's changing who's calling the plays, anything like that on the offense?
Not at this juncture, no.
Mike, why have slow starts been, I mean, you guys have struggled to keep the ball early in games. That would hint that the game plan is maybe not up to par. What's your level of confidence in that
And sometimes the game plan of being up to par or not being up to par has nothing to do with the schematics, but our presentation of the schematics, the training, how we allocate physical reps in preparation, the amount of fluidity and understanding being displayed by the players early on in the game. All of that is coaching and coaching related decisions in terms of the things, the positions that we put them in during the course of the week. And so, yes, you do look at the game plan, but not just solely the concepts. How many times we rep the concepts, what looks we provide, the realistic component of it, the division of labor within the concepts. And so there's a lot to that, but obviously that's something that's being looked at and being looked at very hard given the trajectory of the starts as you mentioned.
How do you juggle short weeks, West Coast trips, plane issues versus trying to, how you practice?
Just as I mentioned, man, you make decisions and you don't look back, but you're also willing to evaluate and learn throughout the process. And so, you know, we talked openly the last couple of weeks about the risk of practicing in the manner in which we were practicing. But, you know, as we saw it, that was the best course of action to take, not only because of the short week component of it, but because of the limited number of players available to us. And we wanted to have an inclusive mentality so that we could have more people involved in the in-helmet perspective on preparation. And when you practice in helmets, when people are limited, you're more inclusive. when you practice in full pads and people are limited, you're essentially excluding them. And all I'm saying is based on the result of us not being as physical as we'd like to be, I'm probably gonna be more exclusive than inclusive this week in our practice. And so those that are limited, a guy like James Daniel, this will be a tougher train to get on this week, maybe than in recent weeks, because we were only practicing in helmets, for an example.
Mike, in general, what's your theory on the impact of play calling on production? And looking at your first month, how do you assess your play calling?
It is a significant component of production, as is, player talent and preparedness. You tell me a specific play, I'll tell you how those variables weigh out. I think in any specific instance, those variables weigh out differently, but they're all significant components. You got to draw up really good stuff. You got to get good people. You got to train them. You got to put them in position to be successful. Obviously, we haven't done enough of that to this point.
If you want a specific, the 4th and 1, bad call or bad execution?
There's a lot of variables at play. The bottom line is, it wasn't a good call because it wasn't productive. But to be completely transparent with you, we lost a lot of short yardage personality because of Dan Moore and Pat Freiermuth. We lost all our big packages. Broderick Jones was already on the field. And so we probably had to get out of our intended box, if you will, in that circumstance because of lack of player availability at that point in the game. But such is life, man. This is the National Football League. There's not 100 guys standing on the sideline. There's an attrition component to play, and it's borne out in matchups, it's borne out in decision-making. And that's one instance where we were in less than ideal circumstances because of lack of player availability.
As
Mike,
far as-
there be any changes in the secondary, especially after all the big plays?
We're going to look at how we divide the labor up, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about it, in an effort to highlight some people. But I won't get any more specific than that. I don't believe that's necessary.
Mike, what do you want to see better from Kenny?
I want to see him make fluid decisions, particularly at the early stages in games. I think as plays get extended, particularly early in games, it increases the potential for offensive negativity and defensive positivity. And so I think a component of us getting off the more fluid starts is more fluid decision making and things happening more on rhythm. And so I think that'll be a focus for him and for us, because it's not just him. We got to be assignment perfect. If we want the ball to come out on time, guys got to be where they need to be. They got to win individual one-on-one matchups and do so quickly. We got to protect them. As I mentioned, he got hit on the 5th play of the game last year, and that altered his day in a significant way, and that was a rhythm pass. But you can't cut people free in the A-gap. And so it's not only him, it's us. More fluidity in our starts, more rhythm, particularly to our rhythm structures. Play extensions aren't necessarily good, particularly at the early stages in games.
As a follow-up to Mike's point about the 4th and 1 that you brought up about the concerns of Freiermuth and Moore being out, was that at all then, did that bring up the prospect of kicking the field goal perhaps? Was that under consideration?
It really was, but that was my initial thought. But at some point, you got to draw a line in the dirt. We had momentum and rhythm. We had converted 2 field goals. I wanted to win that circumstance and keep the pressure on. And obviously, when the play wasn't successful, it negated whatever rhythm that we had established. And it really was a significant play in terms of the trajectory of the game. Obviously, had I known that the play was going to be unsuccessful, I'd have sent bars out there, but I don't get do-overs.
Mike.
Do you believe it's capable for play calling to be somehow split up between 2 people in game, or logistics don't add up?
I think play calling oftentimes is rest in more than one place, but I don't think we talk about it a lot in settings such as this. Either by game plan or by design from time to time, play calling is a cooperative on offense and defense. A secondary coach might have a strong feeling about a 3rd down and long and might dictate that call. An offensive line coach might have a strong feeling about a short yardage circumstance and dictate that call. As examples, I might have a strong feeling about any circumstance, particularly those that are weighty ones. A possession down in the red area or backed up or what have you. And so there's primary play callers, and obviously that's Matt and TA. But for a variety of reasons, week in and week out, or circumstances, it's capable of being a collective, and sometimes more than others.
Just to confirm, if Kenny can't go on Sunday, it will be Mitch.
Certainly.
And he mentioned after the game the offense needs to show play with more heart. How do you coach heart?
You know, he probably referred to his heart, but it was probably about playing hard, which is what I talked to the team about before we opened the locker room to the press, and so it was probably an interpretation of that discussion. They played harder than us. We got to tip our cap to them for that, but we got to rectify that, and the quickest way to rectify that is to acknowledge it sooner rather than later. I didn't waste any time in doing so. I talked to the team about it immediately after the game. I talked to you guys immediately about it after the game. I talked to the team yesterday about it in our tape review. And all was done in an effort to change that narrative. That can't be a component of how games unfold, regardless of whether we win or lose or win close games or not in close games. The physicality component of it needs to be non-negotiable. That's just how we function. That's Pittsburgh Steelers football.
Mike, when you talk about the fluid decision-making you need to see from Kenny, how much of that is pocket management and avoiding some of the pressure in the sacks that he was taking?
You know, sometimes the pressure is born out of not making fluid decisions. And so that's just a component of it. It's not only a challenge that he has, it is a challenge, as I mentioned, that we have. There are a bunch of variables in terms of our offense operating, particularly from a possession down perspective and drop back passing circumstances with fluidity.
Like Broderick Jones, screens and toss plays, particularly on their first drive. What do you guys have to do better there, and are those components at all what Baltimore tries to do?
What blocks make tackles? That's how they got back on schedule. As I mentioned in my opening, they had a 15-play drive in the early portions of the game. A lot of it was on second down. I thought largely we did the job at the early stages on first down. I thought they got back on schedule with the things that you mentioned. And it's about whooping blocks and making tackles. People always screen us, like everyone screens us. I would imagine Houston did an off-season study and studied AFC North football. When you think about the Cleveland Browns, you think about screens to Njoku. When you think about the Baltimore Ravens, you think about screens. Cincinnati, everybody screens us in an effort to slow down our pressure packages. That's every week business for us. We didn't do a really good job of defending it last week, and so I don't know that Baltimore is going to react or respond to that. Baltimore has always run a lot of screens against us. Everybody in the AFC North has, and I would imagine that's where Houston got the idea from.
Like Broderick Jones, got more exposure this last game due to Dan Moore's injury. As he prepares for his first start now, how do you assess his development through the first couple of weeks?
I think he's been practicing really well. I feel really good about what he's done to tee up his performance from a practice perspective, the amount of urgency that he has, the quality of his play. He's gotten his feet wet now. I thought the quality of his play improved over the course of the game. Oftentimes when you get inserted into a game like that, you got to get on the moving train, and you feel some of that. That was evident. I think he gave up a pressure on his first snap, but I thought he got better throughout, and I think it's reasonable to expect him to be really solid with a week's prep.
Mike, last week you talked about the importance of preparation for what opponents are trying to do and clearly conveying that message to your players as far as the coaching staff. What do you guys have to get better as a coaching staff to achieve that conveying part of that?
I don't know that we were surprised by anything that they were doing in reference to what you specifically asked. As I said, I thought the texture of the game was about their physicality and our lack thereof. And so sometimes that's not knowledge-based.
Like with you guys having a bye after this game, will that factor at all into any of these injuries and whether guys might be able to go?
Man, we have all eyes on this Baltimore Raven game. We're not making any long-range decisions or decisions with anything else in mind other than putting our very best foot forward this weekend and winning this football game.
Mike, has Joey Porter earned more reps, and if not, how close is he to being a bigger factor?
Very much like Broderick Jones. I think the trajectory of his practice has been really good, and I think his play reflects that. I think he's had an opportunity in recent weeks to really develop more components of his game. For example, we give Pat Wednesdays off. He's a veteran corner. That serves him from a physical standpoint. He doesn't require as many physical reps in an effort to be ready to play. But more importantly than that, it provides physical reps for a guy like Joey in all circumstances. He's been playing in one-dimensional passing circumstances, 2-minute third down, things of that nature. Wednesdays are big days for him when we rest Pat and he gets an opportunity to work first and second down football and work the totality or the base, if you will, of the installation. And he's been doing a really good job of that in recent weeks. And so we're getting really comfortable with some of the things that we're seeing from him across all circumstances. And so he's positioned himself to be more of a factor moving forward for sure.
Mike, as you think about the lack of physicality, do you think there's something that played beyond just, hey, we didn't practice in pads this week? Are you concerned about your players' commitment to the process?
No,
Like, what gives you that confidence?
I work with them every day. It's my job to have a pulse of the group, and you know, in the midst of that game, I'm standing on the sideline saying we're practicing in pads next Wednesday.
Mike, you're a member of the competition committee. The tush push was used by several teams this weekend to varying degrees of success. As a person on that committee, is that a play that should continue to remain legal?
We had a discussion on it in the offseason. We chose to do nothing. That is the committee's position, and so that is my position. And so my position will not change based on what's transpiring during the course of weeks. We're not gonna go making changes midstream in the middle of the season. We've established our position on that, and so that's where we are.
Mike, Mike, of your rookies, it seems like Keanu Benton has gotten probably the most, I guess, experience so far. How have you graded his progress compared to that of the others?
He's doing really well, but again, like in a lot of circumstances, oftentimes a rookie's opportunities are not born out of what it is they do, or more about what's going on around him. And with Cam Hayward being out since week 1, that's provided more of a platform for him than others. And I think he's done a really good job with it. He's getting better with each outing, and I think it's reasonable to expect that to continue.
Thank you. You guys have had as much success against Lamar Jackson as really anyone has. How much do you feel like that has been about defending the player versus the scheme, and how much do you expect that to change?
Man, we got talented quarterbacks in our division. The hair stands up on the back of our neck when we prepare for these division quarterbacks, all of them. We have plans catered toward all of them individually. We have to. We better be a thorn in their side. They're all so talented. They're all such central components of what their outfits do. And so it's nothing new there. I just think that is football in Pittsburgh from a defensive perspective when you're in today's AFC North, facing guys like Lamar and Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson.
Anyone else? All right.
Thanks, guys.